And so to introduce Regulatory Affairs chapter, please welcome the none other than Ms. Harpreet Kaur. Harpreet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shireen.
Welcome.
I'd like to just test my mic first. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. So is it possible to spotlight the slides? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Harpreet. I'm the chairperson for the Regulatory Affairs chapter. The Regulatory Affairs chapter is a niche chapter. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I'd like to introduce the Regulatory Affairs chapter. It was created in 2018. It's a niche chapter, meaning that it is focused specifically on regulatory affairs, which is a very niche market in industrial pharmacy. One of the reasons the chapter came to life is actually because of the changes in the government policy with regards to retention of pharmacists. And we noticed that there was increased interest in industrial related jobs. And one of the sections that had a lot of interest was regulatory affairs. So after the chapter was created, we had a slow start because we didn't have that many members, even though the interest was there. I guess because everybody was not quite sure how the chapter would function. Moving forward, we strengthen our objectives and goals, and these are the main objectives and goals. So first of all, we want to work with NPRA and other regulatory bodies in Malaysia to assist MPS to be involved in regulatory related policy development and decisions. We also want to work with Pharma NMRP in Malaysia. Further, we want to provide a platform for pharmacists in regulatory affairs to network, and for pharmacists keen to work in regulatory affairs to gain access to training and related information. Finally, we would also like to improve access to medicines, devices, and services, which is one of our FIP goals. Which FIP, I believe, was mentioned and discussed yesterday during yesterday's session. So moving on to the first objective. Next slide, please. All right. To work with NPRA and other regulatory bodies. So last year, with the changes in NPRA, we had requested to include MPS in policy-related changes and communication, and this is ongoing because at first we didn't get a very good, I'll say a very positive inclusion policy. But on our end, we need to improve why we want MPS to be involved in policy-related changes communication. Next, we also informed MDA about MPS, and this moved to a very positive discussion with MDA via our president with regards to the self-test kits. Of course, community pharmacists eventually were not very happy with the direction MDA went in, but the communication channel was open. Further, we also want to request for training and seminar discounts for MPS members because some trainings related to regulatory affairs are quite costly when they are organized by certain bodies. So therefore, this is one of the things that we want to improve on. And then moving on to the next goal and objective, which is to work with Pharma NMRP. So recently we had some simple discussions with Pharma NMRP, whereby we want to collaborate on training related to regulatory affairs. For those who are in the industry, you would know that most of the trainings and seminars that are provided are actually provided through the corporate companies, through the pharmaceutical companies itself. And so those who are not in the industry yet, and those who are doing, who have their own regulatory consulting firms or who are doing freelance regulatory work, sometimes they have to pay quite high fees, or they are not invited to join this training. So therefore, we want to open this channel to those who don't have access to this type of training, because like I said, this is a niche industry. And there are many who are interested to know more and also to develop themselves in this industry. MPS itself will not be creating, starting new trainings, because these trainings are already all available. However, access to the trainings may not be the most easiest. So hence the second objective. So moving on to the next one, network and training. Right. So regulatory affairs pharmacists would be able to network to explore job opportunities, because when you join this chapter, we intend to have a communication channel for regulatory affairs pharmacies to talk about which companies or which areas have job opportunities. And I believe this is also where remuneration packages can be discussed, because sometimes if you're new, or sometimes if you're joining a certain industry, you may not know what is the basic pay, you may not know what is the remuneration package that you can request. So therefore, networking is very important in this industry. Secondly, information sharing and experience sharing. Why information sharing and experience sharing is important in regulatory affairs is because the policy changes and the changes that happen in our international sphere sometimes also affects what is happening in the Malaysian sphere. And regulatory affairs is not just niche to Malaysia. If you join a company, or if you join a industry, or if you decide to open your own regulatory affairs consulting firm, you would be doing regulatory affairs not only for the Malaysian market. You would also be getting requests from other countries that want to come into Malaysia, or from Malaysian companies that want to go into other countries. So this is where networking is very critical, especially if you are going to be networking with other independent regulatory affairs consultants. This platform would be very good for you to kind of assist each other in the markets or in the countries that they are doing well in, and gaining information and experience sharing. The other part of our objective is, of course, training for pharmacists who want to venture into regulatory affairs. Now, this training can come in many forms. One is, of course, the training related to the job scope itself, but other trainings include quality assurance, as well as auditing, as well as risk management planning, which are all related to regulatory affairs. So we need more members, because the objectives are a lot, and if we don't have a strong base of members, we will not be able to get this network and training objectives out. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So the final thing that we wanted to do is also to improve access to medicines, devices, and services. So one of the key proposals that we have identified is actually to change vaccines from Group B to C. Now, why was this item identified? First of all, because of the pandemic. Secondly, because vaccines are not only related to the pandemic COVID vaccines, but also other vaccines, which we hope that this proposal will not only benefit the industry, but also benefit community pharmacies, because one key factor in MPS is that we need to work together with other chapters. So after my session, there will be a session by the Immunization Advocacy chapter. And I believe that all of you are aware that MPS is fighting for community pharmacists and pharmacists' rights to be able to vaccinate patients. So this is where the Regulatory Affairs chapter wants to contribute to the whole policy, policy development process. Okay, so basically those are the areas that I wanted to cover. If you would like to join the chapter, you can contact me. My number is there. Or you can write into the Malaysian Pharmacists Society admin, and they would get you in touch with me. So that is all about the Regulatory Affairs chapter. While waiting for, hold on, let me see if there's any questions. Okay, so at the moment there's no questions, but I do have a little bit of time. So let me just share a little bit more. So for those young pharmacists that you want to join in industry, there are many sectors in industry as explained by Mr. Andrew earlier. So the regulatory affairs chapter will be focusing mainly on regulatory affairs, which is a big section of the industrial platform. Reason being because regulatory affairs is about product registration, product maintenance, pharmacovigilance, as well as maintaining product safety information with the authorities. So you may think that this is just a sort of desk job. It is, but you will have a lot of room to improve and to do a lot of reading. And when you're in regulatory affairs, you have to do a lot of dossier reading, meaning that you have to prepare dossiers, you have to submit the dossiers. So this is where you also increase your knowledge about research and development, because the information is inside those dossiers, those packages that are actually submitted to regulatory authorities, as well as increase your understanding about what happens in production, and also increase your understanding about how clinical trials are done. So this one niche group where you start to work will actually assist you to learn more about the other sections in industrial pharmacy. So any of the PRPs who are already in industry, you have the option of, most of your companies will give you the option of continuing your FRP in that particular company, which is actually a very good learning experience. There are two types of companies out there. One that deals with patent products, which is in a lack of a better term, which is considered like the original products, but we don't use that term, we use patent products. And the other industry is, of course, generics. And then there is also medical devices and food products. So there's a variety of different type of registration that is required. Okay, I guess that is all I wanted to add in. And if there's any interest, you can always text me. I think, Shireen, there's no questions. So, yeah.
Hold on. Harry, there is. Somebody asked that what happened if what is the what is it? Is there a need for regulatory pharmacists in the future? And how many, let's say for example, how many regulatory pharmacists does a company need, and for the whole Malaysia, or something like that? I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, because I don't have the information in terms of what is the market requirement for the national need for regulatory pharmacies. Now, there's two groups. One is, of course, you work in the government, where you are working in NPRA, and then there's the other group, which is you work in the private sector. Now, smaller companies, what they do is they may hire one pharmacist if their product portfolio is small. So they may hire one pharmacist who handles regulatory affairs and also does some quality assurance work. Larger companies that have a bigger product portfolio, meaning that they have more than a few hundred products, they will hire more than one pharmacist. So the normal hierarchy is you have a regulatory affairs manager, you may have an assistant manager, and then you have regulatory affairs executives. And in some cases, they also hire non-pharmacists who join in as regulatory affairs executives or regulatory affairs clerks. So the number of pharmacies a company requires depends on their product portfolio, and also depends on how large the company is. MNCs in general, that means multinational companies in general, have a team of maybe 10 to 15 members in their regulatory affairs department, of which half would normally be pharmacists. In general, most of the regulatory affairs managers, which is the department HOD, are pharmacists. But with older companies, you will notice, because previously there were not many pharmacists interested in this, you may find that the head of departments are not actually pharmacists, but they have very, very vast experience in regulatory affairs. But now a lot of companies are looking for pharmacists to join in their regulatory affairs departments. I hope that sort of answered, but the exact number required in Malaysia, I don't have that. I could do a little bit of research and maybe get that answer to whoever was the person who asked that question.
Okay. There's two questions in the Q&A box.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
just saw that. What about cosmetics? Is the chapter involved? Yes, cosmetics comes under regulatory affairs. And cosmetics is, I guess, the simplest form of registration. You can always contact me via my number to learn more about how cosmetics registration is done. All this advice is given free via our chapter members. How does RA and PV correlate with each other? Okay, so regulatory affairs and pharmacovigilance. Now, generally, some companies, they have their own pharmacovigilance departments. So they will have like safety pharmacies, meaning a pharmacovigilance pharmacist. Recently, the NPRA, last year, they have put in pharmacovigilance guidelines, which now means that even generic companies have certain pharmacovigilance workload that they need to submit. So in most companies, what they do is under the regulatory affairs departments, they will assign one pharmacist or they would give a designation to one pharmacist to be the pharmacovigilance lead. So like I said, again, it depends on how large the company is. Now, larger companies, they have a specific pharmacovigilance department, and in smaller companies, they actually overlap with pharmacovigilance work, quality, some form of quality assurance work, some form of auditing work, and a majority form of regulatory affairs work. So I hope that answered the question. Does this also involve import regulations? Yes, regulatory affairs also involves import regulations, because you are going to, meaning when you join into regulatory affairs, especially when you get hired into regulatory affairs departments, you will need to know about the import regulations. You will need to know how to apply for the permits and so on and so forth. So yeah, the scope is it's a very niche section, but the scope is very large.
Okay. Since we don't have any more questions, thank you so much, Miss Harpreet, for the wonderful sharing session. And I hope that anybody who would like to join regulatory chapter, please get in touch with Miss Harpreet. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you, Shireen. Okay.
Welcome.